Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kim Smith, and I'm the Director of Programs at the University of Chicago Crime Lab. We're really excited that you're going to spend the next hour with us exploring the intersection of behavioral science and violence prevention. I'm thrilled to see such a great turnout. And before we get started, I just want to encourage everyone to make the most of today's session by asking questions. We received a lot of questions ahead of time and have done our best to incorporate those into the run of show, but please continue to take advantage of the Q&A feature. Our goal is for today's webinar to be highly interactive, so please do not hold back. And we also have set aside 30 minutes after the formal webinar program ends for questions, so go crazy. If we could go to the next slide. Here's a quick rundown of our agenda. We will have a brief presentation going over some of the research results of our work at the Crime Lab, and then we'll be joined by some of the researchers who led that work. And then we will have a panel discussion with some of our practitioners from the Choose to Change program. And as I said, we will close at the hour mark and stick around for 30 minutes of Q&A. Let's go to the next slide. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the University of Chicago Crime Lab, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan research center based at the University of Chicago, and we design, test, and scale data-driven innovations to reduce gun violence and improve our country's criminal justice system. Through research and in partnership with community-based organizations, public sector agencies, we really do aim to identify strategies that can reduce violence. And one of the key areas in which we focus on is how insights from psychology, sociology, economics can be applied to violence prevention efforts. And we're going to highlight some of those research findings today. But before we continue, would love to learn a bit more about who's in the virtual room with us today. So I will launch two quick poll questions. The first one is up right now. Who is in the room? Which industry or kind of sector do you represent? And I will give everyone about 30 seconds. All right, and the second question, how would you rate your understanding of behavioral science programs? On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being I have a lot to learn, and 5 being I'm an expert, please take a moment to submit your responses. All right, let's see where we are. Okay, so we have a really good representation across the spectrum. A lot of folks from the nonprofit industry, government, research and academia. And then in terms of our understanding of behavioral science programs, kind of in the middle. So I'm glad to see such diversity in the room, and whether you're brand new to the work or consider yourself an expert, our goal is for everyone to be able to take something away from today's conversation. Now I want to take a moment to share a short video from one of the participants in the Choose to Change program, which we'll focus on in our second panel. We thought it would be important to incorporate the perspective of someone who's benefited from these types of behavioral science programs. So would love to give you all the opportunity to hear from a participant in their own words.
I'm Cesar Rodriguez for Inside Chicago. In this week's edition, we'll talk to one Chicago public school student who decided to make a change in his life, and it's all thanks to a program supported by CPS and the city of Chicago.
God is good all the time.
Daryl and Cassandra high-five each other because this CPS student just made a change in his life. After years of a troubled home life, Daryl is going to school and buying his first car.
What does this car represent to you?
This car represents like progress, change.
It's all thanks to his youth advocate, Cassandra.
It ain't never nothing wrong with just trying new things, because it may help you in the long run. Like, I got my car, I got my second mommy and stuff like that, second family.
Daryl is a high school senior and is a participant of Choose to Change, or C2C.
Gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
We always figure it out.
We do. We really do always figure it out.
The program partners with youth advocate programs and children's home and aids to engage youth heavily impacted by violence and trauma by connecting them with intensive advocate and wraparound supports.
We're advocates not just to the young people, but to their families. You know, we are wraparound services, so we come in and work with the parents, we work with the siblings, we work with anyone that's involved with the family to be of assistance to them.
C2C also provides trauma-informed therapy to help students live safe and successful lives.
All right, well, we're glad you were able to hear from one of the participants, and we will send along additional resources for those who want to get more of that participant perspective, not just for Choose to Change, but some of our other studies. Now we are going to turn to a panel of researchers who have been evaluating these types of programs for years, and they will be able to give us an overview of the current knowledge base. So what do we know? Where are there still gaps? But before we begin, I will just provide brief context for our discussion. So let's start with the global perspective. Compared to other wealthy countries, I think many of us know that we have a very unique challenge in this country, and that is what brings us, the Crime Lab, to this work, and I think many of you to this conversation. And that challenge is with respect to safety. This graph is showing you homicide rates across a number of different countries, and as you can see, the US stands out as an outlier. We go to the next slide. What we're looking at is the same graph, but it is breaking down homicides into gun-related homicides, that's shown in the yellow, and non-gun related homicides, that's the gray part of the bar. And what we see is when we look more closely, almost all of the difference between the US and other wealthy nations comes from this gun homicide rate. Unfortunately, this element of American exceptionalism shows up in other alarming ways. For example, guns are now the leading cause of death for children and teens in the US. So what do we know about gun violence that creates these disparities between us and our peers around the country? And I ask that question, what do we know about gun violence? Because the answer is really important for how we think about solutions. Because contrary to common belief that most gun violence is premeditated, what you might see on TV in a show like The Wire, most gun violence actually stems from arguments that escalate in the heat of the moment. And to illustrate this point, I'll share an anecdote. Several years ago, one of our colleagues was in the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center, and at the time, a staff member told them that he always tells the kids who are held there, they're not bad people, they're just people who made bad decisions during enormously stressful and difficult situations. Or as he put it, if I could give you back just 10 minutes of your lives, none of you would be here. And I share this anecdote because I think it gets at potential strategies and solutions to reduce gun violence. How do we make those 10-minute windows more forgiving, difficult situations easier to navigate? And one way to achieve that is by ensuring that there are individuals or adults present to intervene when these 10-minute windows, these arguments, these altercations are happening, folks who can de-escalate. That's kind of the rationale behind street outreach organizations and organizations that do violence interruption. Is kind of intervening in the moment. Another approach you can imagine is to equip individuals who are navigating these critical 10-minute windows with new tools. And that is really where behavioral science interventions, specifically cognitive behavioral interventions, come in. So these interventions, they help us as individuals evaluate our responses to stressful situations. Those responses can sometimes create additional problems when a gun is present. So what are alternate responses? Cognitive behavioral interventions, they also give us more tools to better understand the behaviors and motivations of others who we're interacting with. So at their core, they really provide us with a set of problem-solving skills, enabling us to cope with challenging situations. And at the Crime Lab, we've evaluated several of these programs, and I'll talk about a few of them today. So the first is Becoming a Man, which was implemented by Youth Guidance in partnership with Chicago Public Schools. This program is designed for 7th to 10th grade boys and involves 60-minute group cognitive behavioral intervention sessions held once a week. The next program is Choose to Change, which is jointly delivered by Brightpoint and these advocate programs you'll hear from shortly. The program is designed for 13 to 18-year-old boys and girls who are beginning to disconnect from school, and given that higher risk of involvement in gun violence as compared to BAM participants, for example, Choose to Change offers more intensive programming. So it's a 6-month program where youth receive 8 hours of mentoring per week and participate in up to 16 group therapy sessions over the course of that 6 months. We've also evaluated a program that was run by the Northern Illinois Project Safe Neighborhoods Task Force, and that was delivered to individuals being held in the Cook County Juvenile Temporary Detention Center. This initiative consisted of 4 90-minute sessions and was really designed to engage and support participants during their time in detention. And then finally, we'll talk about Ready Chicago, which was coordinated by Heartland Alliance and implemented by smaller community-based organizations in Chicago. And through that program, individuals were provided with nearly 2 years of intensive programming. And it was really hyper-focused on men at the greatest risk of being involved in a shooting, either as a victim or a perpetrator. It involved relentless outreach and engagement, and then after participants were engaged, offered 2 main forms of support: employment and job training, and cognitive behavioral programming. So as you can see, there are some key similarities across these programs. And I unfortunately don't have enough time to do them justice in terms of like the content and the richness of the services. But you can see that they all incorporate group-based cognitive behavioral interventions, allow participants to address how past experiences and environmental factors can manifest and influence behaviors. They also all include that common theme of the presence of an individual who can kind of understand and relate potentially to some of those experiences that the participants are going through. Of course, there are a lot of differences. A quick scan of this chart shows that the dosage, the number of hours per week per session varies. We also see differences in the kind of focus population, where Becoming a Man focuses on 7th to 10th grade boys who are regularly attending school. A program like Ready serves adult men who are oftentimes in their 20s and 30s. And even the backgrounds of the individuals delivering the cognitive behavioral interventions varies across these programs. So in Choose to Change, clinicians facilitate some of these group sessions, and in the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, the sessions were facilitated by staff who did not necessarily have a clinical background. So I want to highlight those differences, but despite the differences, what we see when we are evaluating these programs is that they really do show great promise in improving violence-related outcomes. So the evaluation of Becoming a Man found it reduced violent crime arrests by between 45 and 50%. Our evaluation of Choose to Change found that it reduced violent crime arrests by 48%. And excitingly, we released an update to our evaluation last week. We found that the impacts of Choose to Change persist up to 3 years after the program has ended. Our evaluation of the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center found that it reduced readmission by 20%. And our work to evaluate Ready Chicago found a 43% violent crime reduction. With Ready, we also were able to detect impacts on shootings and homicides, both victimizations and arrests. I will let our research panel talk about that, but also important to note that we did not see necessarily consistent impacts for a program like Ready. Different individuals had different outcomes. So while there is a lot of promise, there's also still a lot we don't know about how these interventions work for different populations. And that's the meat of what I'm hoping we can get into in our panel discussion. So I am going to invite our research panelists to come to the virtual stage, by which I mean they can begin to turn on their cameras. And I'll just introduce them in turn. So First, we have Noor Abdul Razak, a research director at the University of Chicago's Inclusive Economy Lab, an affiliate of the Crime Lab, and one of the principal investigators of the Choose to Change study. Noor is an applied microeconomist interested in research that addresses the structural foundations of inequality. At the Inclusive Economy Lab, she oversees and directs research projects related to guaranteed income. And she's also working on several studies focused on criminal justice system and violence prevention, including the role of police discretion in measurements of crime, interventions that reduce involvement and exposure to violence among youth, and legal supports for youth at risk of incarceration. Next, I'd like to introduce Monica Bott. Monica is a senior research director at the University of Chicago Crime Lab. She serves as the principal investigator on a number of applied research studies, including those focused on alleviating mental health for young women and Ready Chicago, the initiative I just discussed. Her work has been published in high-impact journals such as the Quarterly Journal of Economics, the American Economic Review, and Science, and has frequently been cited in media outlets such as the New York Times, NPR, and the Chicago Tribune. And last but certainly not least, we have John Davis, a professor at the University of Oregon and an affiliate of the Crime Lab. John is an academic expert in crime, inequality, labor markets, and social policy. He uses field experiments to understand how to improve efficiency in markets without negotiable prices. John conducted several large-scale field experiments to test whether social programs like summer jobs, high-intensity tutoring, and structured conversations in juvenile detention centers can reduce crime and improve academic achievement. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate not just the work that you've done to generate such incredible knowledge about these interventions, but you taking the time to kind of share what you're learning with the world. So I'm gonna just dive right in. And my first question, I wasn't able to spend a ton of time going through the specifics of either the programs or the research results. So I would love to hear from you all on some of the why, and maybe you can get at both of those aspects of the work in your response. So yeah, let's talk about the research. What did you find, but also why do you think you found what you did? And maybe a second part of that is, given how different some of these programs are from one another, are you surprised by what you and your peers found when you were evaluating the impact? So I will ask Monica to start. I see she's come off mute.
Sure. Thanks, Kim. Thank you for having me, and hello to all of you out there in the sort of virtual ether. I think that this body of work is adding up to something that's really exciting, which is we need to make progress on a number of fronts. But we do have some inkling of the kinds of interventions that could be really helpful in the here and now at reducing violence involvement for young people. I think the reason that we do science is actually to be surprised. And one thing that surprises me is the magnitude of these effects. And I think Noor will talk a little bit about the sustainability of these effects. In Ready Chicago, this was a very intensive program. It was a 2-year program that combined cognitive behavioral intervention with workforce involvement. And we saw huge reductions in shooting and homicide arrests to the magnitude of 65% across the board, across all participants. And even bigger reductions of almost 80% for those participants who came through the community referral pathway. There were 3 referral pathways to go through the program. When we started, I don't think any of us really thought that shooting and homicide arrests would have different effects than shooting and homicide victimization, would have different, effects than other types of violent crime. We also, I don't think, could have anticipated the differences in who was benefiting most from the program and who the program seemed to work more variably from. And so I think the thing that's surprising is, what I would call heterogeneity, or the fact that it seems to work really well for some people, less well or more variably for others. And we can start to really understand that so we can give better information to practitioners about what kinds of interventions to deploy to which individuals at which time, but they all have this common thread of, you know, having this metacognitive element to it where it's skill building. And I'm an educator at heart. I used to be a teacher. A lot of my work is in the education space. And so I think to me, it's really heartening that these kinds of skill building activities in the sort of interpersonal behavioral metacognitive space, the clinicians here can correct me on the right vocabulary to use, can be really helpful in making progress in the immediate term in a sustained way. And I don't know if Noor wants to talk a little bit about what those effects look like for Choose to Change, but to me, that's the most surprising thing is like 2-3 years later, how kind of sticky the effects are, because we just don't really see that in social science. I think it's exciting.
Yeah. No, thank you, Monica, for teeing that up. And thank you, Kim and the Crime Lab for having me. Before I jump in, I just wanted to say thank you to Brightpoint and YAP, who run the Choose to Change program, and to my co-author on the study, Kelly Halberg. We also had a large team of analysts and research managers who were absolutely critical to getting this work done, especially Chris Pinto, Brandon Damash, and Heather Bland. So just wanted to extend my gratitude, as like this work would definitely not been possible without them and many more people. And we started this project in 2015, so it has been a long journey, and we are really thrilled to see this work being shared more widely. So to talk a little bit about what did we see in Choose to Change, and what I found, I think, both surprising and I think the most exciting about the results is that I'll just briefly describe what we see in terms of impact, and then I'll talk a little bit about the program model and why we think we saw that. And so just overall, what we saw was that C2C participants were less likely to be arrested for any crime 24 months after the program started. And that is actually, it's about a 31% reduction in the probability of having any arrest in those 2 years afterwards. We saw that effect actually persist. And so even 3 years after the program starts, so about 2.5 years after the program ended, we're still seeing the sustained impact in reducing the likelihood of being arrested by about 23%. What was incredibly important, though, is that when we broke down those arrests by the charges associated with those arrests, we found these very large reductions in violent offense arrests. And so during the course of programming, Choose to Change reduced the number of arrests by about 47-48%, which was the statistic that Kim mentioned earlier. And then again, we saw this persistent impact. So 2 years after the program started, C2C is still reducing the likelihood of being arrested for a violent offense by about 39%. So a little bit about why we think this happened. I think I'll take a step back and describe the program model a little bit, and because I think it's absolutely critical to why we see these effects. And so as Kim mentioned, we know a lot about cognitive behavioral therapy type of interventions. There's a lot of past literature now that has shown that these types of programs can be very effective in reducing any type of criminal legal engagement. But what has been difficult is that most of these interventions in the past, like Becoming a Man, for example, or the Cook County JTDC interventions, they're offered in institutional settings, right? In BAM, you have to be, connected to school, engaging in school enough to benefit from something that's happening in school. We don't obviously want to wait until someone's detained to be able to reach them. And yet we know that there's a large number of young people who are disconnecting from school, and so they're not going to be benefiting from those in-school programs. And they may also have other needs that prevent them from like truly engaging in any type of CBT type program, such as maybe food insecurity or housing instability. And so they're just not able to sort of concentrate and be able to fully take advantage of those types of services. And so what was unique about Choose to Change is that they combined this intensive wraparound services and mentoring that was like the key to engaging young people who are disconnecting from school. They made sure that their basic needs were met. They developed this really strong relationship with the young people. And then about a month after services, they then connected them to these CBT group therapy sessions, which helped them address some of their past traumatic experiences and help them develop a new set of tools to respond in challenging or stressful situations. The other unique part about the program model is that the mentors or the advocates are actually attending those group CBT sessions together with the young people. And so they're learning the same, skill set, the same tools. So in the, 7 to 8 hours a week that they spend with the young people outside of those sessions, they're able to reinforce those skills. They're able to remind them, oh, this is what we learned, in group last week. Like, this is a situation where you could apply it. And so we think that there's a lot of learning by doing happening. And so while it was only a 6-month program, we think that is like one of the key reasons why we see this large effect, but also persistent effect even 2 to 3 years after the program starts. And I'm sorry, I'll let John Davis please jump in.
Yeah, and thanks, Nora and Monica. It's really exciting to hear about your research, and thanks to Kim and the Crime Lab for hosting this, and to all the participants for being here. So I worked on the Cook County Juvenile Detention Youth Outreach Forums program that was implemented by the Northern Illinois Project Safe Neighborhoods Task Force. And so this program's much lighter touch than these other interventions we've been hearing about today. It was a series of 4 90-minute forums. So literally youth sitting in a circle while they were detained in the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center. Importantly, it was totally voluntary to come. They were able to stay back in their dormitory if they didn't feel like participating, but most of them were excited to have kind of an opportunity to do something different while they were there. So participation was pretty high, but they sat in these circles and had conversations with community members about how crime affects them. They had conversations with police officers and command staff from the police department, and they talked to former offenders about some of the non-legal consequences and legal consequences of crime. Now, I was hopeful when I got involved in this program that we would see crime reductions because of participation in this program, because it was based on some of these other interventions like BAM had been done before we saw this, and we were starting to see some exciting results about that. But I wasn't expecting to find as big of the results that we found. This was only 6 hours total if they went to all 4 forums. So compared to a 6-month intervention, I would expect smaller interventions to have much smaller effects. But this is a group of youth who can really benefit from interventions. And on the previous slide, we saw there was a 19% reduction in the number of new readmissions to the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center when we look at youth who were randomly assigned to be invited to these forums compared to the youth who weren't able to be invited to the forums in the control group. But we see very similar actual reductions in crime when we look in the year after the program. In the 12 months from when the program ran, and we find a 42% reduction in arrests for violent crime. We find a 30% reduction in arrests for property crime, and this was a 6-hour total intervention. So I was hopeful that we would see benefits because it had things like cognitive behavioral training and practice about conflict resolution and discussions of consequences and connections with resources in the community and possible adult mentors. So all of those things had been shown to work, but I was really blown away that we found such large effects given how low intensity the intervention was.
And thank you all for sharing. I really do think the kind of variance in dosage, but those kind of, as you said, large persistent impacts is one of the reasons why at the Crime Lab we think these are such promising opportunities and interventions for cities, states, nonprofit organizations who want to make any of their violence prevention programming more robust. Of course, these programs are operating in a larger context, and participants are, while they're attending the cognitive behavioral intervention sessions, they're also maybe living in neighborhoods where they're exposed to high rates of gun violence. Their peers may not be participating in some of these sessions. And I think that kind of leads to maybe some of the limitations of these interventions. Nor, I know you have actually looked at this specifically in your research, kind of like the social external factors that potentially contribute to gun violence and how and whether some of these interventions can run up against that larger context. So can you talk about, your work investigating, the promise of cognitive behavioral interventions or behavioral science interventions, given the broader social and external structural factors that individuals are navigating?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Kim, for that question. I think it's super important because we know these programs are not operating in a vacuum. So I'll start with, I mean, we know, decades of systemic racism and disinvestment has led to these fundamental disparities in safety and opportunity. And one policy lever that has been used a lot in the past is policing and incarceration, which has led to incredible costs to society and especially to people of color. And so these programs like Choose to Change, while they could often be seen as alternatives to policing, they are still operating in neighborhoods with a high police presence and strategies around like proactive policing. So what that highlighted for us as researchers is that we know that arrests are sort of this like imperfect proxy for behavior, right? An arrest is the result of both a young person's, actual underlying behavior and what they do, as well as a police decision to, maybe stop someone and arrest someone. And so what we did in the paper was actually try to disentangle this a little bit and understand sort of what is the discretion that is involved around certain types of arrests, and try to take that apart from where the C2C impact was where C2C was impacting actual behavior change. And the way we did that is that we actually took advantage of very rich text data from arrest narratives, and we ran a machine learning algorithm to better to classify arrests as more high discretionary, or these are arrests that officers will stop someone for maybe looking suspicious or being in a high crime area. And we distinguish those arrests from like low discretionary arrests that are maybe driven by like a 911 call or typically like a 911 call, for example. And so what we found was that the program's impact, C2C's impact, was concentrated in arrests where there was less discretion. So those like really large effects that we were talking about earlier, most of those were coming from these low discretionary arrests. So these are arrests that are coming from sort of interpersonal interactions. They're arrests coming from like 911 calls, for example. And then we saw no impact on more discretionary type of arrests. And importantly, we didn't see that the program had an impact on the likelihood of being stopped. So a young person in C2C was equally likely to be stopped compared to their peers who were in the control group. So what did this mean? For us, I think what it showed was that the program is effective at changing real behavior. So like we know that some of the critiques of these types of CBT programs are, well, maybe they're just helping young people avoid police or better interacting with police. We think from that work that that's not the case. Like there is definitely real behavior change happening. And then what that analysis also highlighted for us was that there is some potential collateral effects or costs of these policies, of these proactive policing policies, because we see a situation where young people have changed and they are reducing their engagement with violence, and yet they're still getting stopped at equal rates by police in these neighborhoods. And so our paper is not able to sort of speak about the trade-offs or the costs and benefits of these different policing strategies, but I think it does, at least for me as a researcher, I think it's really important to start incorporating the role of police when we're evaluating these programs, and so that we can have a better understanding of why impacts may not be happening. And it's not always tied to the behavior of the young person because of these external structural factors that you were talking about earlier, Kim.
I think that's really important. And Monica, I would love to invite you and John to kind of comment on, as we are evaluating and trying to measure the impacts of these programs that are delivered to individuals, whether in any other work that we've done, we've kind of seen those impacts either be accentuated because of the exposure of like networks, or even just like the community aspect of, for example, men in the Ready Chicago program returning to neighborhoods where there is a high level of gun violence. I don't know if that came up in any of the qualitative work that you were doing.
Yeah, so we, just to sort of answer some questions that were coming up through the chat as well, in Ready Chicago, we identified 2,500 men across 3 community areas in the city of Chicago that were at extraordinarily high risk for gun violence involvement. And when I say that, I think it is still staggering to me 7 years later that when we look at men who were identified to be eligible for the program, 2,500 of them in the 2 years or the 20 months after they were identified to be eligible for this program we saw rates of being shot or killed at 11 per 100. That is 11 men for every 100 men. And the average age of these men are about 24 years old. So I think that is the world in which we were living in at the time. And so we certainly wanted to understand whether Ready Chicago was effective or not at the individual level. But regardless of whether it was Ready or something else, I think it sort of behooves us to understand what can reduce just the extraordinarily high violence involvement of these young men, because even compared to men of the same age in the same neighborhoods, they had a 2 to 3 times higher likelihood of being shot and killed. And, it's over 50 times that of the average Chicagoan. So I think needing to intervene was really important. Understanding that this was the best bet that we had was really important. And so we did, in addition to trying to isolate the effectiveness of this program, we did some qualitative work like Kim mentioned. So we did interviews with participants. There was a participant advisory council. We did a lot of observations. And this idea of this sort of dynamics between individual level interventions and community-based effects really did come into play. And here's how I would think about it. So these studies are not designed to understand whether these programs are effective at the sort of community level. So when you see these trends at the community level, it's entirely possible that this contributes, because we know that for every incident of gun violence that we prevent future incidents of gun violence as well. And that's kind of incorporated into our benefit cost analysis, where we think every dollar investment in Ready Chicago saved between $4 to $18, depending on how inclusive or conservative you want to be. That sort of investment takes into account these like the future incidents of gun violence. But I just want to be really clear that we're not saying that standing up programs like this can work in isolation. They have to work in tandem with other community-based policies. But certainly from the qualitative work, and there will be a qualitative report that's coming out from some of our colleagues, Megan King and others at the Crime Lab. What we heard participants say is, I could make more money, but I came for the formality of the paycheck. I stayed for the relationships and the skill building. And it gave me the opportunity to try on different identities, because I was someone, and this is like in the words of participants, I was someone who brought harm to my community, and now I am someone who helps my community. And I think that sort of shift in identity is something that's brought about by the skill building, and then the ability to practice those skills in the sort of context of the job environment. And I think that that's actually a through line across all of these programs.
And Monica, something that always kind of stuck with me about the Ready Chicago program was the way that the participants kind of referred to the cognitive behavioral interventions. I'm going to give you the last word. Can you just share that story with the crowd?
So nobody liked cognitive behavioral therapy. It sounded too clinical. And so the Participant Advisory Committee came together and said, we're going to rename this. And they chose the name Control-Alt-Delete, or CAD. For those of you who remember back in the PC days, you would use Control-Alt-Delete as the command to sort of reboot and refresh. And the participants felt like the sort of CAD or CBT program that they were participating in had that sort of rebooting or refreshing effect for them. And so Control-Alt-Delete is something that they found value in their lives. And then we can systematically see this in the data and research as well.
Great. Well, that is a perfect note to end this part of the conversation on. Thank you so much to our research panel. I'll ask you all to go off camera, but don't go too far, because you will be back for that last 30 minutes of Q&A. And at this time, I would love to welcome to the stage our practitioners. So we heard from the researchers, and now we would love to hear from those who were involved in actually delivering and working with young people as part of the Choose to Change program. So we have with us today Jadine Chow from Chicago Public Schools. She is the Chief of Safety and Security, and in that role, she helps to maximize student achievement by promoting safe and calm environments and building relationships with students. She oversees the safety operations of close to 400,000 young people in the city of Chicago in more than 640 schools. It's a Herculean task, and is responsible for supporting school administrators in their efforts to provide a safe and welcoming learning environment. Under her leadership, Jadine has helped district schools plan and implement proactive practices to encourage calmer school climates and positive student behaviors. Hello, Jadine. Also excited to welcome Dave Williams. Dave is the Chief Program Officer at Youth Advocate Programs. A Chicago native, Dave joined YAP 18 years ago as an advocate, and in that role, he mentored young people, supported their families, and since then has held several positions within the organization, including Regional Vice President, Regional Director, and Program Director. Dave was part of the team that helped YAP secure a partnership with Brightpoint, at the time Children's Home and Aid, to form Choose to Change. And he previously worked at Hull House Association and earned a master's degree from Chicago State University. Dave was also in the inaugural cohort of the Community Violence Intervention Leadership Academy, which is run by the Crime Lab. And then finally, we have Julie Nubler, who is the Program Director of Mental Health and Wellness at Brightpoint. She is a licensed clinical social worker who received her master's degree in social work from Loyola University Chicago in 2008. And she has nearly 20 years of experience in social services and currently oversees mental health and wellness services across the state of Illinois and in the Metro Chicago region. Her portfolio includes Choose to Change, of course, school and community-based behavioral health, statewide parenting support services, and program manager and child welfare counseling. She has almost a decade of experience as a clinical supervisor and has also worked as a field consultant with the University of Chicago Crown Family School of Social Work, and currently has her own private practice in Chicago. So you all, thank you, first of all, for joining us today. And as Nora said, for your work on Choose to Change. I know that implementing new programs is not an easy feat, let alone doing so in partnership with a research organization like ours. So I just want to make sure that you all receive those flowers. And you all played a really key role in implementing Choose to Change. So to start, Dave and Julie, can you describe Choose to Change and how Choose to Change is different from programs that you implemented previously with your organization?
Well, Choose to Change is, and it takes on elements of all of our programs. Our approach is a community-based wraparound approach where we provide services and supports in the community. And we were very fortunate to partner with Brightpoint and bring together this cognitive behavioral therapy component to enhance our work. So it only improved our level of engagement, our skill development for the young people that we serve. And Julie can kind of talk more about Brightpoint's role in developing the program.
Sure. Our intention, in joining the partnership with Youth Advocate Program was really to play off of both organizations' strengths. One of the things that Brightpoint, then Children's Home and Aid, was known for was our behavioral health or mental health, community mental health services. And to highlight was that we were a strong organization alone, but partnering with Youth Advocate Program, we were able to really enhance our services and really get the biggest bang for our buck. What we found is the sort of the secret sauce in the Choose to Change program is not just the CBI intervention or the CBI work, but and not just the advocates or the mentors doing the wraparound mentoring, but really it's the integration of the two services together. What sort of sets Choose to Change apart from other school-based or community-based violence prevention programming is that it's not one or the other, it's both, and they're happening simultaneously and interwoven together. So the advocates are participating in the CBI and group intervention right alongside the youth. They're learning the skills from the coaches or therapists right alongside the youth. Our coaches are able to go out into the community and support the advocates and support the youth and to implement those skills in real life situations through different social opportunities, different different field trips and kind of things like that, that we're really able to highlight when and how to implement skills.
And you're talking about skill building. I think it can be hard for folks to kind of picture what that looks like in practice or in the real world. So would you mind just walking us through an example of, some of the skills you're equipping young people with during those group sessions?
Sure. Well, first, the CBI intervention is group-based, and it lasts about 16 weeks. And so when a youth comes to their initial weeks of the CBI work, they start off every session with one specific skill, and that's called SOS. And that means slow down, orient, and self-check. Really zeroing in on the need for our participants to stop, think, and choose a different path. And so what that highlights is a need or an opportunity, creating opportunity in stressful situations, and really any sort of interpersonal conflict or something like that, where you can slow down and really stay grounded and stay in your thinking brain. What that skill highlights are mindfulness techniques, grounding techniques like deep breathing, visualization, and different things like that to really stay in your body. And over time, with the help of the advocates, going out into the community and practicing those skills when there's an opportunity, or when something like that might come up, or we're really seeing youth embrace these things in really small ways sometimes, and just taking an extra second, or and sometimes a little longer. They do role plays out in the when they're talking through situations with their advocates that maybe is causing conflict or worry or stress. They slow down, and and an advocate will help them problem solve about how they're going to communicate with their teacher, with their parent, or with a peer about what's going on. And part of the group work is really being able to identify what's happening on the inside, so that we can see how it's impacting the things on the outside, and making those connections. And there's a ton of specific activities that we do to sort of illustrate and support the skill growth and reflection that really is at the heart of the Choose to Change programming.
And I think this is a great opportunity to note that we actually did create a program guide. It's actually a clip of that is on the screen right now. So please check it out. It's on our website. The goal was really to make sure that some of the mechanics behind a program like Choose to Change were available to not just the nonprofits that are already delivering the program, but nonprofits across the city of Chicago and around the world. So the program guide is available on our website. Please check it out. And I think to the point about additional nonprofits, our colleague Jadine Chow from Chicago Public Schools is on the line for many reasons, but one of which is because, when we partnered with YAP and Brightpoint, we, undertook this really rigorous randomized control trial. We were generating insights along the way, and we wanted to share it with the public sector, because the public sector investing in effective programs is really how you get to impact at scale. And Jadine, you were really excited about the results. You have since, kind of onboarded new organizations. So can you share with the crowd that's here today what it meant for us to kind of deliver those research results to you, and how you've since taken the program to new heights?
Thank you so much, and thank you for this conversation. Choose to Change is an extremely important program to Chicago Public Schools. Just ask any of our families or our principals who have touched the program. As Kim just stated, we saw the results early on, and we said, this is something we want to explore. At the same time, we also know that scalability and implementation it can be tricky once you hit a certain level. And so one of the things that we talked about when University of Chicago and YAP and Brightpoint said, hey, we're interested in supporting you, CPS, how can we do this? They created this program guide with the idea in mind that we know that every community is different. Every community has different needs and dynamics. So how can we do this in such a way that reflects the fidelity of the program while also respecting the needs of the individual community and cultural relevance? So they created this program guide, and very, I'll say very generously, because it was really in all arms wide open, they said, how can we work with other organizations? Jadine, let's pull in other organizations who already have close relationships with Chicago Public Schools. So we actually expanded the program beyond YAP and Brightpoint to a point where now we have 4 additional organizations around the city: New Life, Lifeline to Hope, Build Chicago, and Bright Star Community Outreach. And I'll just give you some numbers. When CPS really started first getting involved with promoting the program, we were under 100 students. With this most recent expansion that we're talking about, which is what we call Choose to Change Informed, we have served, at the end of last year, 5,600 students, collectively between YAP, Brightpoint, and the 4 organizations we named. That is a tremendous, we're really proud of that. And over and over, we hear from families that this program has made a difference, and that's why we support this program.
Thank you, Jadine. And Julie, I want to bring you back to the conversation because, Jadine talked about the need to make sure that the program and the services were really tailored to particular communities and young people. And I know that as part of the kind of co-creation of Choose to Change, Brightpoint actually did a lot of tailoring of the curriculum, of the CBI, of the CBT curriculum. So can you talk about that and what the process was and if you're still making those adjustments?
For sure. So yeah, I mean, I think what we discovered really quickly is the CBI intervention that we wanted to base our approach on wasn't particularly culturally responsive. It didn't really take into account the way that different communities and different cultures experience loss. As just an example, how they grieve traumas and move through their days. And so what we really discovered, in our first cohort was that we want to ground this in something that we know is effective and has a solid base, but we're going to need to riff on this. And over the course of the years that Choose to Change has been in existence, we have sort of transformed our approach to be unique to every group, to every school that we're engaged in, every community in which we're embedded in. You could go to a week 4 group in Little Village and it will look really different than a week 4 group in the Inglewood community or the North Lawndale community. And sometimes you might go in and the group will have experienced a loss or a trauma, and they won't even be on a week. They will have stopped and are just focusing on processing what's happened and doing that work. And that, I think, is something that that was I imagine pretty challenging from a research perspective, is that it's always just a little bit different. But I think is something that has really helped us to be effective. We work to make sure that our clinicians reflect the populations in which they're working. We're delivering services, in 2 languages. Sometimes, and that's just sort of how we approached it. I know Dave might have some thoughts about that as well.
Yeah, how we approach the work, again, how we approach the work at YAP is we do zip code recruiting. So we recruit staff from the communities in which the young people live or live there. And I think that we recognize, we ask them, the 4 principal questions. What do you need? How can we help? How can we work together as equal partners? And then at the end, how can you give back? And when you ask those questions, you really elicit, and they give you direction as to how what direction the work should go, how we can provide support to them and their families.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask you all a pop quiz question. We didn't prep for this, so apologies in advance. But in hearing you talk about just the need to personalize, what do we know might be helpful in this context? It seems like there are still a lot of questions, and you're all continuing to, as you said, Julie, riff and iterate. Maybe starting with Jadine, what else do you want to know? How else and research partners like the ones on the call or others, there are a lot of academics on the call. What else do you want to know in order to continue to scale a program like Choose to Change or, serve a new population of youth? We tried to do as much as we could during this kind of first study, but I'm sure you all had a lot of other questions that we didn't, get a chance to explore. So what are some of those questions that you all have for us?
Thank you so much again. And thank you for everyone, Dave, Kim, Julie, all your teams, Noor, everyone who's been a part of this. This program has really taught us a lot, I think, and there was really this wondering about how can we apply what we know from the program, what elements of the program, which have been the CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy, combined with the life skills, combined with the relationships, all of these things, as someone said earlier, is sort of a secret sauce. I think one of the questions that we are always wondering is, aside from those participants in the program who are getting the benefits of the program, are there any key elements of the program that can be applied maybe a little bit more universally across our schools who maybe can't afford the full program? What elements of the, another version maybe of a manual, Kim, sort of a mini Choose to Change, if you will, just interventions that can help just schools at large.
I mean, from the mental health portion and CBI intervention perspective, I think really digging into, what is it about the services that we're providing that are, are driving some of the change? Is there something that from a qualitative perspective, is there something that resonates more or helps to the youth to understand, apply what they're learning, or having this the ability to examine and the self-understanding? What are we doing to develop that specifically, and what feels like it's working? Because it's great. I think the arrests, the reduction in arrests are amazing, but also a little bit of what is the behavior change? Like, what is it that's changing in them? And I think that would be helpful.
Well, for me, I'm always interested in supporting instruction. So I want to, also examine how we support instruction, how we help young people matriculate through the educational process and be successful long-term, go off to college or trade school. That's the long-term impact that I want to be able to measure at some point in terms of just their involvement in instruction and ensuring that they're receiving the quality of education I know Chicago Public Schools wants to offer. And we want to make sure that those skills translate further on down the line in their lives.
We are also really, go ahead, Julie.
Sorry, Kim. That just made me think of one other thing is, we always talk about how Choose to Change helps our youth to kind of to start dreaming or dream bigger. And I just, connected to that, like how, not just are you not being arrested, but like, what is your trajectory look like now? Have we made those positive changes too?
Absolutely. And I believe we will be looking at some of those education outcomes. I am also curious Dave and Julie, to see, do we see any changes in graduation rates, GPA, school misconduct? Because, it's kind of like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like safety, and then, economic mobility, educational attainment. So do we see those additional impacts? Right there with you. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much to our panelists. Dave, Jadine, Julie, in addition to being amazing partners in this work, you also did an amazing job today. And this actually brings us to the end of our session, the main session. We have a lot of great questions in the Q&A. So the panelists and we're available to hang around for another half hour or so to try to get to as many of those questions as we can. Those who are able are very welcome to stay. And for those who have to run, thank you for being with us. If you'd like to learn more about the work that we've covered today and get an alert when we have education outcomes for the Choose to Change program, please subscribe to our newsletter. I believe the links are in the chat, and you can also scan the QR code to go to our website where the program manual and the full research paper can be found. So I'll pause there and ask our researchers to come back on camera. Great, and I think we're just going to start going through some of the questions. So I will pause in case there are any that John, Monica, and Noor, you wanted to respond to off mute, and while you're doing that, I'll look for other prompts.
So I'll just answer an easy one quickly because I accidentally said I would answer this question live. Still learning how to use this, but so someone asked if the interventions were all done in person, if there was an aspect of it was done virtually. So pre COVID-19 pandemic, it was all done in person. After COVID hit, for the Julie, correct me, David, correct, it was maybe about like a year and a half maybe, where the sessions were all done virtually, and then there was some like slow coming back into person after things were opening up again. I think one thing that I'll highlight is that despite things being done virtually, they were still connecting with the young people. They were super creative and were having walks outside. And so, sorry, Julie, Dave, please jump in and answer a little bit more about like what that dynamic looked like. That's helpful.
Well, one of the things that was really, really helpful during the pandemic is the Crime Lab helped us get a donation of PPEs. And we were able not only to be able to have the PPEs for our staff, we were able to issue them to the families. Jadine did a great job in ensuring helping our families receive food and lunches. And so we had a tremendous opportunity, partnership with Brightpoint. So we were able to be creative. Jadine was also assisted us in helping our young people get hotspots where they could stay connected to school. So I think that all of those elements, again, all of it is about collaboration. So collaboration with Brightpoint, CPS, the Crime Lab, all helped us be able to deliver quality services during that very difficult time. Well, but that PPE investment was, man, it was a godsend because it was very difficult to get PPEs at that time.
Yeah, and Jadine, you had us in some CPS schools well before I think doors were even open to all students. Like we were able to, for the kids who needed it most, we were able to get in and do the full programming much earlier than we would have been able without Jadine's advocacy and things like that. So it was, it was about a year of virtual only, but we were quick to move back to in person when the opportunity was.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that was a really important priority for the district. These are the students who needed that connection. I mean, everyone needed that connection, myself included, but everyone really understood at the district. The students that we're talking about who we have in our Choose to Change program are the ones that don't have the household stability where they can sort of figure it out. So yes, we opened schools up to host Choose to Change, and that seemed, we had tremendous response. The students came, they wanted to be with us. So that was and I appreciate the advocates for coming out, and Julie, your team for coming out. And a lot of people were uncomfortable coming back out, but your team, all of your teams were willing arms wide open, willing to do it. So thank you all so much for that difficult time.
Jadine, Dave, and Julie, one of the questions that we didn't get to, but that I think speaks to some that I've seen already answered and still pending, is around partnerships and recruitment. So could you talk about, maybe Jadine and Dave, like how you work with principals, for example, or even other institutions in Chicago to identify young people who you think would really benefit from this program?
Dave, you can start first and then I'll chime in.
Well, one of the things is this collaboration and partnership. So being able to collaborate with principals, be able to law enforcement, having that collaborative and relationship building. You know, YAP's all about relationships. So you got to form relationships. You know, and Jadine, Tony has been integral in our forming relationship with principals. And then after forming those relationships, you have to make those deposits. And so I think our team, Monique, Chris, and many of them have made those deposits, been consistent, on time, supported young people, been available on 24-hour call, and been supportive. And I think that those efforts made by the staff, and I always believe it's always the people, not necessarily the program. You got to hire, in this model, you have to hire the right people to be able to deliver high quality services to the young people and families. And if you don't have the right people, it's very difficult to implement those programs. But I think the collaborative efforts, Jadine and Tony goes out. If we have any struggles or challenges, they help us work through those. And so it's just been an outstanding. And then we've gotten a good reputation, and we've tried to build on that with our partners at Brightpoint. And we just like to continue to work. So, but just partnering with CPS has been outstanding.
I mean, I'll add that, Dave and his team and Julie and their team sort of sell themselves. Once the schools meet them, we don't have to do very much. But I will say on the front end, sometimes, they're not as familiar with the program. And so having that soft sort of introduction, I do think is helpful. And once they're in the building, because it does require space. So the schools, especially those that are sort of crowded, we have to sort of negotiate that relationship. But once they're in, then our bigger problem is, hey, can we have more mentors? Hey, can we have more students in the program? Which, I mean, I think is a good problem to have, but I also would think that the word of mouth spreads very fast. So in the city of Chicago, if you're doing good work, that information goes from school to school, principal to principal. And I think that's where Choose to Change, thanks to the strong work of the teams here, it has a really strong relationship, and the families hear about it too. And so, their families like, hey, especially in one part of the city right now in Little Village, we have feeder schools that the elementary schools have Choose to Change. And then when the students go to high school, some of the high schools have Choose to Change. They don't all have it. And so now we're getting some pressure. Hey, why doesn't the school have it? It should. And so, that's how we were kind of navigating, the resource availability. But that's to the credit of the partners on this call.
Thanks, Jadine. Dave, we have 2 requests for you to please repeat those 4 questions that you asked a young person when you first engaged them.
Yes, ma'am. What do you need? How can we help? How can we work together as equal partners? And at the end, how can you give back? And giving back is therapeutic. And this is, part of many of us on this call, we're giving back. And it's an important ingredient of the work.
I think also just something that many of us should strive to live by in general. Thank you for sharing, and it makes a lot of sense, kind of like those 4 pillars given what we're seeing. So I'm going to go through a few other questions. Monica, coming to you, there are questions about Ready and like why we might attribute the success that Ready had to the outcomes that we saw. So I think maybe, I'll let you take that question where you will. I can imagine a few different ways to go about it. But what do you think?
Sure. I think maybe one thing, so Chicago has a very rich history of outreach workers and making sure that we're doing intervention programs for individuals who are involved in gun violence. Outreach workers are like very much a fabric of the sort of violence prevention efforts in the city. I think one thing to know about Ready is that in lieu of a hospital-based intervention program that sort of waits for an incident to happen and then provides services at the time of an individual being in the hospital. So an incident has already happened. Ready Chicago tried to identify men that community outreach workers were like, I know this guy's like hot in the community, and so let's provide proactive services using this combination of evidence-based services to them. I think that it required us all to work a little bit differently. And it really created some beautiful partnerships between outreach organizations, research organizations, the transitional jobs providers. You'll hear, Brenda Palmer at NLEN say, this was like not a population of men that we were serving in our jobs programs. And so there was this collective learning that happened that formed partnerships, again, for like proactive outreach. In lieu of waiting for something to happen and then intervening kind of after the fact. So both are necessary, but I think that that's one really big shift in what the Ready staff had to do and adapt to. So like, this is a very small example, but we were, as part of the research study, able to get entry and exit data out of the jail. And so we know in this field that the idea of a warm handoff is something that is best practice. It's very hard to operationalize. But in this case, we could actually flag and say to outreach workers, this guy that's in Ready Chicago is actually going to be released today. Can you make sure that somebody is there? Outreach workers could continue to write letters when somebody was picked up and then in jail while they were sort of waiting a court date. And so that continuous relationship building that was facilitated a little bit through the data, a little bit through the researchers, but also through these very key partnerships, and there was a lot of relationships and trust that was built over this time, was sort of key, I think, in driving some of the outcomes that we saw. But I'll just take the liberty, since I'm off mute, to answer another question, which is, this all sounds very rosy and wonderful, and it is. And I personally am very excited about the opportunity that this body of research gives us. And it's not sort of an unadulterated silver bullet. So it's not like, do this and everything will be solved. And I think everybody on the call here would agree with that. And so I think it was Julie that said, there's still a lot of tinkering to do. A question I get a lot is like, so we should just do Ready. And I'm like, well, Ready had, our primary outcome wasn't, statistically significant. And it really showed huge reductions in shooting and homicide arrests, but not victimization for certain groups through community outreach referrals, but not the data-driven referrals. And so there's all this complexity that we still don't really know the answer to systematically. And so when it comes to things like what dosage, what curriculum, all these sort of practitioner knowledge and nuggets that Julie and Dave and Jadine were talking about, I would encourage everyone on this call to try your own variation based on your local constraints and local knowledge of your participants, the people you serve, the context in which you work. But I do think that there's this thread of skill building across all of these age groups and contexts and institutional partners that just seems so, so critical. And so I think leaving that on the table would be a mistake.
Thanks, Monica. Jadine, I'm going to come to you next, but first, John, something that we've talked about before is, you've actually been involved in quite a few crime lab studies over the years, summer jobs, high intensity tutoring, obviously the work in the juvenile detention center. And I think Monica's point about things like, not necessarily always going as planned, but these partnerships also resulting in, a lot of attention and excitement around promising programs. Can you just talk to, some of your experiences maybe outside of the JTDC work that you can kind of reflect on?
Well, the JTDC work is actually a great example of how it's really important to be flexible. And I think there was one question about the important, what are some ingredients in maintaining successful partnerships? And really we ran into the most issues of all of my studies in this JTDC Youth Outreach Forums program. We initially wanted to mirror a similar program that was implemented for the adult probation population, where they were inviting adults to come to these meetings to talk about the consequences of crime and connect them to resources and things. So we initially ran it with juvenile probationers in public settings. And so we would, for example, rent out a park district building and invite them to come. And we found that while there was interest in participating, we just couldn't get youth to come to attend. Often they would cite things like safety concerns, like they would have to cross a gang boundary or something. So we were struggling to get enough youth to really make a difference in the study. So it was actually a pivot to go to the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, where youth's alternatives are a little less exciting than participating in this program. So I think being flexible is a really important part of, like, both with the realities on the ground and what practitioners need, but also just trying to implement the program in a way that you're able to serve the people who need it best is an important part of the success of these programs. Yeah.
Thank you. No, that makes a ton of sense, and thank you for sharing. Jadine, we received this question actually during the registration period, and it's around the implications that the findings of Choose to Change, what those implications are for the goals of like public K through 12 districts and educators. So can you talk about that, and specifically how the city is currently supporting evidence-based programs?
This is a really important question to us, so thank you so much for asking it. You know, I just want to start by saying, when we see violence in the news, and we all see it, there's really a reflexive feeling that maybe not enough is being done. Maybe there's nothing that can be done, that, you know, this is not going to stop ever. And I think that feeling can be overwhelming, especially for those of us who work with young people, because we know it's not true. We know that we can do more. And what happens when we see this research is it reminds us our feelings, that, you know, our intuition that this works is really proven out. And so we're so grateful that the numbers actually show what those of us who are seeing it every day, we know these young people who are in the program, we see the progress and the improvements that they're feeling and that they're seeing. The numbers show that, hey, it's not just us anecdotally saying, hey, this is going well. For the young people who are in the program, the data shows it's not just our imagination. And I want to say also that, and I think someone said it a minute ago, this program is not in isolation. So Choose to Change is in combination and collaboration with all these other things happening inside of the city, as well as inside of our school specifically. And that's our own practices. So I saw a question about restorative practices. This program incorporates it's all about restorative. It's all about making sure there's redemption. So many of our participants are coming out of the juvenile justice system. And one of the biggest implications I would say about this program on the schools is, so often, and this is a bias that we're working on, the bias that someone who has coming out of the justice system returning into our neighborhood school, well, maybe, I'm just gonna be brutally honest, maybe we don't have enough to support this young person. Maybe they need something else. And the answer is, we should never be writing off any of our young people. And what makes this program different for us is that all the people, all the adults that Dave and Julie and Crime Lab have brought to this effort, they all believe in that. That is such a strong, really a testament to them, that they will never, ever give up on one of our young people. And so I say the implication of this research is just to keep us going, to say, you know, it's still, the outcomes still persist, and it is worth all the hard work that everyone's putting into there. And so I'll just say one last thing. The schools who have it, the principals, and again, it sounds rosy. It's quite rosy, actually. Come meet some of our young people. These are young people, some people meet them and say, no way is that a student that was in need of a tier 3 intervention. Now that, and the answer is, maybe you might have met them, maybe you should have met them a few months ago. It wasn't always this way. It's not linear either. So come back next week, you know. So I'd say that to say, you know, this is just one of those things that gives us really hope.
Well, and one of the questions that was answered, but I'd love to kind of like bring others into the response, is around like the future of Choose to Change. And Noor, maybe you could start by talking about the next steps with regards to the research. I hinted at the education outcomes, but there's more. And then Dave, Julie, Jadine, what does the next 1 to 4 years of Choose to Change in Chicago look like for you all?
Yeah, so on the research side, we also did extensive qualitative work over the last 9 years. We actually ran a number of, it was like over 60 like interviews and focus groups, combinations with staff and young people in the program. And so we have a lot of rich insights from those conversations that really help to speak about the why and why we think C2C is working. It's focusing on sort of that engagement piece and how sort of like specifically like the YAP part and their mentors, how they were able to develop that trust with young people, sort of despite the circumstances that they are operating in. And so that paper is coming out very soon. And so we're really excited to share a little bit more about some of those insights, Julie, that you were talking about. That would be very helpful to know about. We also have some work following the educational outcomes of C2C. So one of the key outcomes was not just, does C2C impact a young person's engagement with the criminal legal system, but also is it positively impacting their school engagement? So we will be releasing results looking at the impact of attendance, persistence in school, as well as graduation. And once we have that sort of complete picture of the impact of C2C, we'll also be conducting a cost benefit analysis to sort of speak about, the scalability of these types of programs long term.
Great. Dave, Julie, Jadine, what's next for Choose to Change?
Well, of course, if you ask me, I want to continue to work and expand it. And this opportunity, again, has started in Noor just reminded me 9 years ago, but it's really, it's been amazing, but it's informed our practice in terms of how we deliver, not only just in Chicago, but nationally. We've learned from our partners at Brightpoint, our partners at CPS, the importance of partnering with government, collaborating with community partners, as well as the importance of philanthropy and how philanthropy can support our work long term. And so all of those key learnings have helped us benefit our practice in terms of how we deliver the service, not only in Chicago, but nationally. And then as well as it's just really, the experience going through a randomized control trial can be challenging, but it also, that challenge will make you improve the work that you do and how you manage a project and how you approach, so because sometimes we receive contracts, but it's not just the contract, it's how you manage the project and what the importance of data. So continuing our work long-term in Chicago is always the goal. We working collaboratively with Jadine and her team and Brightpoint and their team, and we continue the efforts in terms of expanding and continuing our work in the great city of Chicago.
In terms of Brightpoint, we are committed to the Choose to Change partnership with Youth Advocate Program, as well as our work with the other community-based organizations. At this point, we are the we are the CBI partners in all of those relationships as well, and we're absolutely committed to that. But like Dave said, because of what we've learned from just the research, Noor's research, and the Crime Lab's support and all of the data, we're using it to inform all of our a variety of areas of practice of Brightpoint. Our youth services, our mental health and wellness is collaboration with our youth services programs. One of the places that we'd like to take things is an informed Choose to Change informed approach, but like trending it younger. Could we, is there an abbreviated version or something that we could do to to intervene earlier? We want to move into the prevention space so that youth never get to the point that they are on the roster for Choose to Change. And so that's something that we're thinking about. The other really big thing that we would like to figure out is how to, how to get the word out about, what we're doing and what works, and, what have we learned, lessons learned, how do we help other organizations from tripping over the same rocks? Because it was it's been a long 9 years of, well, that didn't work, and oh, this is amazing, we should do this again. Our coaches, even this year, with the addition of the community-based organizations, our coaches came up with the idea of, we're going to sit down and have a full day of just what worked, what didn't work, what are our goals, and just almost strategic planning for the year to come, which is doesn't on its face sound all that innovative, but when it comes to how do we do this work across now 5 different organizations, and how do we do it effectively, everybody in a room together kind of hearing each other, it was something I think that our team felt was really successful, and we got a lot of positive feedback from.
And I'll just close it out, Kim. Obviously, Chicago Public Schools is very committed to this. I've allocated monies from my own budget to support this, in partnership with the generous contributions we receive from philanthropy as well as other government entities. This is something that we exceptionally want to continue. And that is why, again, that expansion through the other CBOs as well as the partners on this call is so important, so that we can continue to meet the needs of the communities.
Thank you. Well, we have 4 minutes left, and I'm both going to ask our panelists to kind of share any final words, so something that you wanted to say during the webinar that you weren't able to, or address the remaining questions in the chat. So I will open it up to my esteemed panelists to choose how they want to spend their last 30 seconds on the webinar.
All right, I'll just spend the last 30 seconds thanking Dave and Julie and Jadine and everyone at the Crime Lab. This was like one of the first projects that I worked on when I was a graduate student, and it was, honestly, I'm just truly humbled to have, been on this journey with you all for 9 years. I think like the work that you have done in this city is absolutely amazing, and I really think it speaks to sort of like the importance of these like research practitioner and policymaker relationships and work. And so the fact that, Jadine, as soon as you saw the results, you were super excited and were ready to scale it. I think it's just really does speak to like the importance of this model. And so thank you all.
I agree with Noah. Jonathan, did you want to say something? I just agree with Noah in terms of that. I'm just very appreciative of the opportunity. I just, really to help the young people work in communities, the real demonstrating the power of collaboration and working together to solve problems. And I think that that's the way in which we can solve problems, not just here in Chicago, but nationally, but collaboration, working together, and the willingness to take on these difficult challenges. I just, as Jadine just said, just giving hope. And so I'm just really, really grateful for the opportunity.
And I'll hop in that Monica mentioned this earlier, that we've seen a lot of evidence, like, or proof points that interventions can have big impacts on outcomes that are really socially important, but there's still a lot of puzzles to understand about targeting and who benefits most from these programs and what happens when we increase the scale of these programs. So kind of building on what do I see the future of these interventions being is continuing to build evidence and expand our understanding about different types of programs and who benefits most from these programs, but also just using this evidence to convince policymakers to invest more in these programs so that we can see what they look like at big scale. Because even though we are seeing these large reductions, clearly the figure that Kim started the talk with, showing America's unique homicide problem, isn't solved yet. So it's exciting that we're making progress, but we need to use this evidence to expand the scale of it so we can make even more progress.
And just to answer Maisha's question in the chat, which is, what is the envisioned future of behavioral change interventions and addressing societal issues like health or education or crime. I think we want our kids to be safe. We want them to learn and be in school, which we know is the most protective factor. And we do have some evidence that the combination of cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance, commitment therapy, narrative therapy together can reduce PTSD, anxiety, and depression as well in young people. And so mental health being a key aspect of health, I just think the more that you can improve the sort of quality of life for kids on all of these dimensions is something that we probably want for our own kids, but that we really can systematically do. And these kinds of partnerships are examples of how everyone pulling together in the same direction, using their expertise, can help us get there faster. So we shouldn't leave any solution on the table. And we should be really dedicated and diligent in figuring out what we're doing, why we're doing it, and then is it getting us to where we want to be? And if it's not, let's try something else because it's just too important not to.
And I'll just say that, and I agree with that, Monica. Thank you. I just want to say that, the research really shows a lot of the data, but if you really want to know what's going on, talk to the kids, talk to the young people. And I think that is what makes us so excited about this. And talk to the advocates, the level of commitment from our advocates. And it's not just the program hours. I think Dave and Julie both, they'll tell you their staff are committed 24/7. I know this. The young people will call them at all hours, any day. And that is what this work takes. And so we're just so grateful for everyone who played a role in this, and grateful for all the audience members today who took an interest in this program. Thank you.
Great. Well, Julie, I don't know if you have any last words. If not, I'm happy to close us out. So I hope what came through today is that at the heart of what we all are doing on this call is a commitment to developing interventions and solutions that reduce gun violence that are rigorous and relevant to the real world context. And through the combination of scientific rigor and community insights, we really can create meaningful change. And I hope that is something that you took away from today's discussion. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.